Hi there, I want to take a few minutes and talk to you about a book that I just finished reading and dispel some of the rumors that surround the sort of history or legend of the French Laguiole style knives. This book by Christian Lemasson, Histoire du couteau de Laguiole, the history of the Laguiole knife. Just an excellent book. Currently it's really considered the Bible of the history of French Laguiole knives from the Laguiole area. He did really methodical research. He looked at sales records and records of suppliers from where the knife-making companies got their supplies from, the dates, and really did a thorough job in describing how things developed. And it's quite a bit different than the what the online sellers would have you believe or understand. It is all in French. Some of the words are a little bit obscure or knife specific, so you may need a little help with those if you do pick it up. But it's well worth reading, and I just wanted to touch on a few points that I thought were very interesting. So the first one is, the fact that Calmels basically designed and developed the Laguiole knife as we know it now in 1829. And it looks like 1829 is really when the first Calmels started in the knife business as a knife maker, but primarily at that time and up through around 1860, the major knife style that was being used what they call now the Laguiole droite, or the straight Laguiole knife. Now this is a Sauveterre by Guy Vialis, but it really has the general shape of the Laguiole droite, which was a straight handle with a little, what they call a bec de Corbin, or a little beak on the bottom of the tail, and a drop point style blade. The back spring typically would have the end of the spring here, which goes into the notch, has this little wide portion that they call the fly, or the mouche, and that's a technical term for the end of the spring. Now, some of these had locking mechanisms that you could pull up with your fingernail. There was a little blind or an obvious hole, or a pull ring that you could pull up and unlock them, but traditionally that fly or mouche design was smooth and just maybe geometrically shaped. It didn't have any particular pattern to it, and that remained through the life of the Laguiole droite, which was still made up through 1915 or so, was still popular. So this was really sort of the shape that the major Laguiole knife makers were making up until around 1860. Now it looks like it was the case that Calmels did create the shape as we know it. Let me grab a sort of a classically shaped one. As we know it, with this nice graceful curving handle and the Yatagan style blade, which was really the difference that set those apart. Now, one other thing they talk about is the fact that this developed from the Spanish Navaja style knives, but Lemasson pretty much dispels that. There are several differences in the way there is construction, the bolsters on the knife. The knives have a similar, roughly similar shape, but the blade style is different. The handle curves down much more. There's bolster on the handle, and it turns out that knife makers in Châtellerault and I believe also in Thiers were making Navaja style knives and exporting those to Spain around that time, and so and they were also making parts for French knife makers in the Laguiole area, and so that may be where part of the myth comes from, that they came out of the Navaja style, but I think it was really just some of the makers or suppliers were actually making both styles of knives at the same time, and actually French knife makers were supplying those to Spain at some point. So here's a very classical styled Laguiole knife. there really wasn't much decoration on these. The Mouche up here was typically smooth. Let me grab one that has a more general shape to it. Typically smooth on the blade, on the spine, without file decoration, and maybe just a geometric shape for the Mouche. Now, eventually, those started to change a little bit, and they started to. Here's one with a scorpion tail, so they started to do a little bit more fanciful handle shapes. Pigeon wing is one. This is a scorpion tail, and they started to do a small, like, floral decoration on the Mouche. Sometimes they'd have a fleur-de-lis. Here's one with, let me find it, an occitan cross, which was a symbol of Occitania, which was basically the lower half of France, the southern half, which was traditional there. And so they did different variations on those. And then at some point they did start doing some fancy file work of the springs and maybe a little bit on the blade. But it wasn't really till about 1909 that Calmels, and also about that same time Nicholas Crocombette, started designing the Mouche in the shape of a fly or a bee. So that's one of the rumors, that, you know, the fly was granted by Napoleon, yada yada, but really the fly decoration appeared around 1909, it looks like 1908, 1909, and that was the first time that it was used. And it really didn't take off and wasn't sort of universally used until maybe the 1930s or so. They still use different stylings, the occitan cross, a heart shape, sort of fanciful designs, but it really wasn't the bee. It's become the standard definitive look for a Laguiole knife, but it really wasn't there to begin with. The other thing to talk about is the occitan cross, or not the occitan cross, the shepherd's cross, the croix de bergère on the handle. That's the little pin work here, and theoretically the sheep herders couldn't go to church, and so they'd stick the knife in the bread and they'd pray to that. Well, the pin decoration really wasn't there on early knives, and it really wasn't until they started doing the file work and the different sort of flavors of the Mouche, where you see pin work like this, a little triangular geometric pattern. Here's one that has the shape of a horse leg with some decorative pin work, and sometimes they'll just have a circle with a little bit of pin work around it as well. This cross really didn't come about as decorative until after World War II, so the 1950 era. The other thing are the forged fly or Mouche or bee versus what they call soudé or welded on. So this one is welded on. You can see the joint very clearly here. It's a separate piece, and that started as a way to lower the price and increase production around 1930, when they were able to do sort of electrical spot welding of these pieces on it. So if you're looking at an older Laguiole knife and you see a separate welded on bee, you know that that isn't any older than 1930. If you see that and the shepherd's cross on it, you know it's probably post 1950 or 1960. One other thing, the original Laguiole knives from the Laguiole area were really what they call this plein manche, or full handle. They didn't have bolsters. And the bolster technique really was something that came out of the tiers knife makers in factories as a way to reinforce the knives. Now, some knife styles that were used in France earlier did have bolsters, like the Issoire style, but that was really something that the tiers knife makers started. Now, the actual makers in Laguiole started using pieces and components and actually finished knives from the town of Thiers for their cutlery shops in Laguiole as early as probably 1885, and up by about 1900, even Calmels was ordering finished knives and components to be assembled and fit in their shop from Thiers, and it was really only the larger Laguiole knives, the 14 and 15 centimeter handle ones, which they called a Laguiole mariage, which were basically wedding presents, which were a large folding knife that were kind of used in ceremonial occasions, kind of like a carving knife for Thanksgiving would be used, were still hand forged and fit in the shops in Laguiole as well. Now there were makers still doing hand forging and making things. It's not to say that that wasn't happening, but in general, the manufacture of the Laguiole knives really went hand in hand with Thiers, which had much better automated assembly and manufacturing techniques that a lot of the small shops in Laguiole didn't have, and it was much cheaper for them to order the pieces and do the fitting, or just order completely assembled knives to their specifications with their maker mark on it. For instance, this one right here, which is a 13 centimeter Calmels. Currently, I believe most of the components for these knives are either from G. David Arbalete, the company, or actually, and then assembled in the shop, or actually completely manufactured knives just delivered with the blade stamp. So many of the companies, Salette, Paget, Calmels, did contract out their knives and have those delivered, and they sold those with their knife mark. So a little bit of dispelling of rumors, the whole idea that the B has been on there forever, that was granted by Napoleon, the Shepherd's Cross, and the fact that true artisan Laguiole knife making really was only done in Laguiole, and it was all handwork done completely there. Really kind of bogus. It was really a hand-in-hand partnership with Thiers and the knife makers in Laguiole that did a lot of that early knife production. So, hope you found that interesting. Thanks.